What's up, everybody? BigSweetC here with you. Got a special little video for you. Today, I want to talk about an old school game we haven't talked about for a little while. One of my personal all-time favorites, Chrono Trigger. Now, what kind of made me get into thinking about this game was we were talking a few days ago about the Sony announcement of the Last of Us remake. And I begged the question, why would you need to remake that game? It's still one of the best games I've ever played, even in terms of its initial release. They have the remaster for PS4, and now they're thinking about remaking it for the PS5. Now again, if it's a remaster more than a remake, I'm okay with that. I always like it when they update older games to the newer playstyle, the newer graphics, the newer processors, just because then it gives you kind of a fresh look on one of your favorite classics. So the announcement of that started making me kind of question what games we haven't seen a remake of that highly deserve it. And without a doubt, I mean, it wasn't 2 seconds into me planning this video, the number one thing that popped in my head was obviously Chrono Trigger. This is not just my opinion, but across the board, one of the probably most popular, famous, well-made games of all time, if not the best. But we'll get into that a little bit later. The reason I think it deserves a remaster is it is still, one, so iconic, two, so revolutionary, yet at the same time unique in the way the game plays out. And yes, I know they had a sequel, and I know they've remastered it, they've updated it, ported it out to the Nintendo DS, PlayStation 1, Steam, I think, has a copy of it now. But they weren't really all that great in terms of how it came out, because it was literally they just took it from a cartridge, put it on a disc, and they called it good. Now the Steam update, obviously, and the Nintendo DS, obviously, are slightly different. The Nintendo DS, I hear, is actually the best port because it's the digital download copy, almost exactly like it was originally, just slightly updated. So it works the best. You have the least amount of delays. Now I had it on PlayStation, and I mean, it's still great in theory because it's the actual game, kind of updated in graphics a little bit. But the cutscenes that they use like an anime video cutscene instead of just the cartridge cutscene, and it like totally lengthened the time it took to load those cutscenes. So it actually kind of took you out, whereas like the original cartridge game, you flowed right into those cutscenes, and you didn't have to wait for them to happen. And so it lost a little bit in terms of its quality when they ported it over to the PlayStation because of those delays. You would think that the cartridge style wouldn't be able to run as fast as a CD, but in hindsight, it didn't actually work out that way. And so those. I do realize that we're talking about a game that's technically been remastered, if you will. But I don't think this deserves a remaster. I think this completely deserves a remake. And the way that this game fights out, so you've got the generic, I don't want to say generic because it's definitely not generic, but you've got the traditional Japanese RPG turn-based idea. But unlike most Japanese RPGs, this is more like the Dragon Quest series, where you are behind your characters looking at the enemy, as opposed to you being on one side of the screen, them being on the other. So it's got a unique aspect in that sense. Plus, it's also got team kills, so you can team up 2 characters or all 3 of your characters for a like a combo attack, and that's still to this day very unique in its own right. There's not many games that allow you to do that anymore. Even the Final Fantasy VII Remake, you still have characters that don't have team-up attacks. You know, you have Cloud with his limit abilities. You have Aerith with her limit abilities, but you don't have anything that they work in conjunction with. Now, depending on how well versed you are at playing the game, you can kind of team up a couple of her attacks with his attacks and make it look like it's kind of a combination. But it's not like Chrono and Frog when they team up to do X Strike. It's not like Frog and Marley when they team up to do Double Cure. You actually have two people that perform at the same time to do a more powerful attack, more powerful spell, and it's still very unique in its way in that. But having said that, the graphical look of it too, I think, would be a fantastic remake. So before we get too far, I'll go over Chrono Trigger in case you haven't played it. I doubt it because it is one of the greatest games. But if you don't know, Chrono Trigger is a 1995 role-playing video game developed and published by Square. This was way back before Enix merged with them. They were just Squaresoft at the time. Originally released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the first game in the Chrono series, the development team included 3 designers that Square dubbed the Dream Team. You've got Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Square's successful Final Fantasy series, Yuji Horii, a freelance designer and creator of Enix's popular Dragon Quest series, and Akira Toriyama, the character designer of Dragon Quest and author of the Dragon Ball manga series. You see all 3 influences in this one. Again, the Japanese RPG told through the lens of the Final Fantasy series creator. You've got the look of the Dragon Quest series through the Enix's creator, and obviously you can see why the two companies merged together. And then you've got that Dragon Ball manga series creator. And that in itself is where the creative design comes out and still really sticks out. This is a game that follows the Dragon Ball manga type style, but it doesn't look like one of the Dragon Ball games. And so it's still got that uniqueness to it. Truly revolutionary and incredibly talented team that put this together way ahead of its time. I can only imagine if this had come out on like a PlayStation 2 or a PS3 even. But nowadays, when you have the PS5 or the Xbox Series X, when you have so much more graphical power, you could do these 3D worlds like Final Fantasy VII Remake, where you're looking eye level but still in the third-person omniscient view style. You can run around these different areas and still have your team kind of attack at the same time. You could do a very simple single attack to build up your ability meter and then go through it. But they also use the active time battle system, which you could also include in this remake, where instead of like Final Fantasy VII Remake, where you have to attack the person or get attacked to build your battle meter, you just kind of have this active battle time system continually going, and when it's your turn, you attack. You could do it either way, and it's perfect for this game. Now, this game originally came out for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It was released in 1995, which is kind of a curious time because it was kind of towards the end of the Super Nintendo era, beginning of the Nintendo N64 / PlayStation / Xbox era. Now, I know Xbox came after those two, but in 1995, when Chrono Trigger was released, PlayStation had already been out. I mean, it was essentially that same year that they got released. And then the N64 was literally the following year. So you had this amazing Super Nintendo game, but everybody kind of already prepared for the next generation. And so you have this kind of in the middle conundrum where you have a game completely developed for the previous generation, blows everything out of the socket with incredible graphics, incredible music, revolutionary gameplay, incredible story that brings people in and gives them a reason to replay and replay and replay. But then you also have these companies that kind of want to move in to the next generation. So you kind of get this You get this game that everybody loves, but you kind of get companies that kind of want to push you forward anyway. And so it fits into that time period that a remake would be perfect for, because now, while we're still kind of struggling with the new generation, getting them out to everybody, now would be a perfect time to update this, because you could put it out there on that new platform, and still, maybe rekindle that fire. And I think it would be fantastic. But the game itself, so the game itself takes place in 1000 AD when you wake up with Chrono. He is super excited. He's headed into the Millennial Fair, which takes place every year. That's when he literally runs into Marley, and the adventure begins. The whole story takes place through roughly 65 billion years, as you travel time back to the prehistoric ages of 65 billion BC. You travel forward to the future after post-1999 into an apocalyptic future where the bad guy, Lavos, has destroyed everything. You go to the medieval ages in 600 AD. You travel back to the Enlightenment period at 12,000 BC. And you get to know where magic comes from, where it came from, why it's non-existent so much anymore. It goes through the story of what happened with the boss, how he came to be. And it just goes back and forth through all these different time periods, connecting these fantastic characters, Chrono and Marley and Luca and Frog, who all have their own special story as well that adds up to the greater whole. You've got Frog, who's been turned into a frog by who you think is a bad guy, Magus, and you have their relationship, where Frog is still mad at Magus for turning him to a frog, killing his friend Cyrus. Throughout the game, you have the option to then fulfill that storyline. Magus ends up being a good guy. He actually wants to help you destroy Lavos, and you find out how they come to be because he used to live. He grew up in the Enlightenment period in 12,000 BC. And through the magic of Lavos and portals and time travel, he gets pushed into the medieval ages, where he comes into contact with Glenn, aka Frog. You've got Luca and Robo. Robo is a futuristic robot who is designed to help humanity. You only find out later in the game that he was actually designed to study humanity, and then use that study to squash the humans and bring forth the robotic future. Because the Mother AI brain believes that as long as there's no humans on the planet, Lavos has no effect, and the robots can then take over, and they will become the predominant species on the planet. But you have Luca, who studies robots and loves technology, and she works with Robo to change his routine, his innate dealings, the way he was designed and developed into a more humane, sympathetic character. She comes from a lineage of technological advances. Her dad is a famous creator, inventor in the hometown of her and Chrono, but she's also hesitant to accept that role because her mom had, in the past, had such a terrible event occur. You get a moment you can actually go back into that moment and fix it from happening. And everything you do in the past affects the future. There's a very tight-knit, amazing, well-done, almost zero loose ends. And I say almost zero loose ends because I'm sure there's some side character that you hear about at some point that just doesn't really go anywhere, but not in the main story. Like the main story is completely woven together to completely design this futuristic world where you don't get that Terminator conundrum. You don't get that Back to the Future conundrum. Everything is very well planned out, and it leaves you, one, wanting a little bit more, but also completely satisfied. That satisfaction makes you want to play it again. It was the first game that came out with a new game plus that I can even think of. You go through the whole game, you fight the end boss, you beat the end boss, then you get to play through it again with all your previous loot. Not only do you get to play through it again so you can collect more stuff, maybe do things that you haven't done, but it's also got different endings now. So those stories that kind of get interwoven together now have their own ending. You can go through it to the point where you see Frog and Magus duke it out. You can get up to the point where you see what happens with Marley in the future, what happens with Magus in the future, pending when and how you take on the final boss. You can even go in there and just take on the boss completely by yourself at the very beginning of the game, and it takes you to a secret level where you hear about all the creators of the game. So they have all of this stuff that was revolutionary at its time, still unique in its day, all wrapped up into this game that had an outstanding soundtrack, outstanding graphical prowess for the times, and this revolutionary and unique battle system that allowed you to tag team with members of your team. Now, they did try to continue the Chrono series with Chrono Cross. Problem with Chrono Cross is it kind of looked like it was slapped together. The story wasn't as woefully tightened together. The characters weren't nearly as memorable. The story wasn't nearly as engaging. And there was a lot more to it. So with Chrono Trigger, you can go in and you can get everybody on your first playthrough. Chrono Cross, you actually have to play through it several times before you can even get everybody. So it limits the ways you can move through the game. You don't get that in Chrono Trigger. You can go absolutely any way that you want as the times come. Whereas with Chrono Cross, it once you decided to go one route, you can go back and go the other. And that, in my opinion, that kind of left out part of the beauty of Chrono Trigger, which is what I do in the past affects the future. Now, I know they were trying to kind of really emphasize that with Chrono Cross, what you do in the past triggers the future. But if I can move back and forth through time, why can't I go into the past multiple times? Why can't I change multiple futures? Whereas you could do that in the first Chrono Trigger, you can't do that in the second. Now, really what made me think of this is going back and having replayed this, being reminded of the beauty of this game, seeing the things that were in this game in 1995 that for whatever reason have been lost to time because game developers just don't use it anymore for whatever reason, really made me kind of think, why haven't they remade this game? I mean, this might be, generally speaking, the greatest game of all time. It might be the most perfect game ever. I mean, there's almost nothing wrong with this. There's so little few errors that it's almost impossible to go through a game without sitting there and nitpicking everything. The translation, the storylines of the side characters that don't relate to the overall story of the game, those random people that are just in towns. You have to really nitpick on stuff to find things that are wrong with this game, and it's changed my opinion dramatically in terms of what I think the greatest game of all time is. For the longest time, since roughly end of 1997, I have been a firm believer that Final Fantasy VII is the greatest game of all time, and there will be nothing ever better than that game. Having played the remake recently makes me believe that, hey, they actually somehow made this amazing game better. And if they continue with the path and the team they're going down, it's going to be an even bigger story. It's going to be even greater story. I think they could totally do that with Chrono Trigger without needing the investment of an entire franchise. You could make this a self-contained game because it doesn't really need any more story. It doesn't really need any more explanation. It's not like The Last of Us 2, where you have to go back and remaster The Last of Us to make The Last of Us 2 better. It's a self-contained game, and it's perfect in every way, shape, or form. Now, you can tell that I'm not necessarily speaking a bunch of gibberish because the overall reception of the game when it first came out was amazing. It was the third best-selling game in Japan when it was released, only behind Dragon Quest and Donkey Kong Country 2. It became a substantial success here in the United States. It was a top seller for 6 months straight. More recently, as they've started putting together these greatest games of all time, GameSpot included it in their greatest games of all time at spot number 28. It was also number 28 in Famitsu magazine, the #1 Japanese magazine in terms of video games. Nintendo Power has it as one of the top 5 greatest games of all time. And it speaks for itself. The aggregate reception, the aggregate score of this game is a 96%. That literally means that everybody who's rated this game has averaged a 9.5 out of 10. I don't know any game, Final Fantasy included, I don't know any game that averages a 9.5 out of 10. Maybe Earthbound. Maybe Earthbound. But even Earthbound has had some sort of cult following where it's gotten a second and a third that were direct sequels. Chrono Cross is not a direct sequel to Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger stands alone. And I again, leads me to wonder why we haven't remastered this game. Now, maybe it's because there's some legal issues between Square Enix and Square Enix. Maybe the directors haven't signed on to a remake of it because, again, if I created this game, why would I want someone else picking it up? I get that. So there might be some monetary or pride reasons that no one seems to be talking about a remaster of Chrono Trigger or a remake of Chrono Trigger. But this is, without a doubt, the #1 game that deserves it more than any game out there. And I know they're coming out with a remaster of Skyward Sword. They haven't remastered A Link to the Past. They haven't remastered Ocarina of Time in the Legend of Zelda series. So they do generally talk about remastering classic games. What it is that finally gets the go-ahead is beyond me, and obviously as a bum YouTuber, I clearly don't make enough to tell you why those decisions are made or not made. But this one, in its sense, I can't get behind the lack of a remaster for this one. This one deserves it more than any game that I can think of, and it is probably quickly revamping me in the idea of what the greatest game of all time is. And this game right here, Chrono Trigger, has easily pushed its way into the argument of best of all time. Because of that, it absolutely deserves a remake. It absolutely deserves a remaster at the very least, where you can get it in 1080p, maybe 4K, and play it at 60 FPS, 120 FPS here on the old PS5, or even the Xbox Series X. Most of the Final Fantasy franchise is now available on Game Pass. So, any day now, Square Enix can make this announcement and make everybody happy campers. Now, I kind of want them to focus on the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I'm okay with that right now. But, we just had a bunch of games released on Sony. So, they have multiple teams. Why, maybe Naughty Dog's probably going to be doing the remake of The Last of Us. I don't know why they can't have Blue Games, who did the Demon's Souls remaster. Why can't they have, let them pitch an idea to it? So I don't know the inner workings, unfortunately, but there is no game, in my opinion, out there right now, ever created in the history of mankind, that deserves a remaster or a full remake, specifically a full remake, like Chrono Trigger does. And again, I'm not saying full remake as in they need to like go in and revamp the story and make it 2-3 games long like they're doing the Final Fantasy VII remake. I think it's self-contained, the story is good enough. But it definitely needs to be redone in visual concepts. Instead of having the 32-bit stereo system, add in that 7.1 surround sound that you can get on every game now. Make it for this next generation. So those of us who got to enjoy it was when it was released, and then pass that on to the generation that will never go back to it because it looks spotty at best. I have friends that, for whatever reason, they'll sit there and they'll play Fortnite, but when I ask them to go back and play a Super Nintendo retro game, they go, dude, I can't get into the 8-bit graphics. First of all, they're 16-bit, motherfucker. Get it right. You know, but they won't even play 2D platformers like Killer Queen with me. And so I think to keep the tradition alive, to keep those greatest games as the greatest games, I think some of them deserve remakes, and this is the one that I think deserves more than anything. But either way, before I get into some 45-minute, half-hour, hour and a half long podcast here, I'm going to wrap this one up. I want to know what you guys think. If you guys think this deserves a remake, if you think this game was trash and everybody is wrong about this one, let me know. If you think that it's perfect the way it is and it doesn't deserve a remake or a remaster, also let me know, because I generally want to know where you guys are at with this. If there's a game that you think deserves a remake, let me know about that too so I can check it out. Either way, that's going to do it for this one. BigSweetC, that's me, wishing YouTube, that's you, wonderful day, night, morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it might be. As long as you're watching, I'm wishing you a wonderful watching time. You are having a wonderful watching time. Do me that favor. Hit that like, hit that sub, hit that comment button below. Become part of the Sweetness family. That's going to do it for this one. Sweetness, signing off. Peace.